The sun was setting over Palm Beach's Ocean Boulevard, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was just another ordinary evening in this upscale Florida neighborhood, where luxury cars and pristine lawns were as common as seagulls on the beach. Officer Wilson had been with the Palm Beach Police Department for 15 years, and he'd seen it all, or so he thought. The black Mercedes-Benz caught his attention as it idled near the entrance of Mar-a-Lago. In his experience, cars that lingered too long in this area usually meant trouble. He flipped on his patrol car's lights, and the Mercedes pulled over smoothly, its tinted windows reflecting the flashing blues and reds. The driver was a middle-aged black man wearing a crisp professional uniform. He rolled down his window with a calm demeanor that came from years of experience handling difficult situations. "Good evening, officer," he said, hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit he'd developed over his 20-year career as a professional driver. "License and registration," Officer Wilson demanded, his flashlight beam sweeping across the car's interior. The driver reached slowly for his credentials, explaining that he was Donald Trump's personal chauffeur of 8 years, waiting to pick him up from Mar-a-Lago. Officer Wilson's expression remained unchanged. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, despite the driver's proper documentation and professional explanation. The chauffeur complied, maintaining his composure even as curious onlookers began to slow their cars to watch the scene unfold. What happened next would be captured by both Mar-a-Lago's security cameras and several bystanders' phones. The routine traffic stop stretched into a grueling 45-minute ordeal. Officer Wilson insisted on searching the vehicle, questioning the driver's employment claims despite clear credentials and multiple calls to verify his identity. The driver stood patiently in the cooling evening air, answering each question with unwavering professionalism. He'd been through similar situations before, but this time felt different. Maybe it was because he was so close to his workplace, or perhaps it was the growing crowd of witnesses, but something told him this incident wouldn't be forgotten like the others. Inside Mar-a-Lago's security office, the monitors showed every angle of the unfolding scene. The security team watched with growing concern, knowing this wasn't a typical security check. One of them finally picked up the phone, deciding it was time to alert their boss about what was happening to his trusted employee of 8 years. The Florida heat had faded, but tension hung heavy in the air. Officer Wilson's partner shifted uncomfortably in their patrol car, watching as another unnecessary search of the Mercedes turned up nothing suspicious. They'd been on scene far too long for a simple traffic stop, and both the gathering crowd and the Mar-a-Lago security cameras were documenting every moment. Little did anyone know that this routine traffic stop would spark a chain of events that would captivate the nation and challenge assumptions about politics, policing, and prejudice in America. As the driver stood there, maintaining his dignity in the face of unwarranted suspicion, he couldn't have known that his experience would soon become a catalyst for unexpected change in Palm Beach County and beyond. The air grew thicker with tension as Officer Wilson circled the Mercedes for what felt like the 100th time. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, searching for something, anything, to justify his suspicions. The driver stood quietly by the side of the road, his perfectly pressed uniform starting to show wrinkles from the long wait. "Pop the trunk again," Officer Wilson commanded, his voice carrying across the growing crowd of onlookers. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. Others whispered among themselves, their faces showing a mix of concern and disapproval. The driver moved slowly, deliberately, pressing the button to open the trunk for the 3rd time that evening. Inside Mar-a-Lago's security office, the phones were ringing nonstop. The head of security watched the monitors with growing concern, his hand hovering over the direct line to Trump's personal office. On screen, Officer Wilson was now demanding to see the car's registration again, despite having checked it thoroughly just minutes before. "Sir, I've shown you all my credentials," the driver said calmly, though exhaustion was starting to show in his voice. "I've worked for Mr. Trump for 8 years. You can verify this with Mar-a-Lago security." He gestured toward the gates, where security personnel were now gathering, their faces tight with concern. Officer Wilson's partner shifted uncomfortably in the patrol car. This had gone too far, and they both knew it. The partner watched as another local police car slowed down while passing, the officers inside clearly puzzled by the extended stop. This wasn't standard procedure, and everyone knew it. The driver's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably the 10th call from Mar-a-Lago's staff checking on him. He didn't dare reach for it. Instead, he kept his hands visible, just as he'd learned to do over his decades of professional driving. The evening had turned into a masterclass in patience and professionalism. A small group of residents from nearby homes had gathered on their front lawns, watching the scene unfold. One elderly couple whispered to each other, the woman shaking her head in disapproval. "That's Trump's driver," she said loud enough for others to hear. "He picks him up every day at this time." The security cameras caught every angle of the incident. Officer Wilson's aggressive questioning, the repeated searches, the growing crowd of witnesses. The footage would soon become crucial evidence, but for now, it simply documented a man's dignity in the face of unfair treatment. "Step back from the vehicle," Officer Wilson ordered, preparing for another search. The driver complied, his face a mask of calm despite the humiliation. He'd been through similar situations before, but never quite like this, never with so many witnesses, never right outside his workplace, never with such clear evidence of his identity and purpose. As the ordeal stretched past the 45-minute mark, something shifted in the air. The crowd had grown larger, their whispers louder, their phone cameras steady. Mar-a-Lago's security team had made their decision. It was time to alert Trump. The head of security picked up the phone, knowing this call would set in motion events that would change everything. The driver stood tall under the streetlights, his shadow long against the pavement. He couldn't have known that his next pickup would be different, that his employer's reaction would surprise the nation, or that this moment of injustice would spark an unexpected chain of events in Palm Beach County and beyond. Inside Mar-a-Lago's grand office, Donald Trump was wrapping up a late meeting when his phone lit up with urgent messages. At first, he waved them off. Running a private club meant there was always some crisis or another. But when his security chief insisted it was about his longtime driver, Trump's attention shifted immediately. "Show me everything," Trump demanded, his expression darkening as the security team pulled up the surveillance footage on a large screen. The crystal-clear video showed his trusted driver of 8 years standing patiently by his car, hands visible, while Officer Wilson conducted yet another unnecessary search. Trump leaned forward in his chair, watching intently. The timeline in the corner of the screen showed this had been going on for nearly an hour. His driver, who had never been late, who knew every shortcut in Palm Beach, who had driven world leaders and celebrities without a single complaint, was being treated like a common criminal right outside his gates. "This is the same guy who drove the Prime Minister last month?" Trump asked, though he knew the answer. His security chief nodded, explaining how they'd tried to intervene, how they'd called to verify the driver's identity, how Officer Wilson had dismissed their attempts to resolve the situation. The footage continued playing. Trump watched the growing crowd of onlookers, their phones recording the scene. He saw the uncomfortable shifts of Officer Wilson's partner, the concerned faces of Mar-a-Lago's security staff at the gate. But what struck him most was his driver's dignity, the calm professionalism even in the face of clear harassment. "Get me the police chief," Trump said, his voice carrying that tone his staff knew well, the one that meant business. As his assistant dialed the number, Trump kept watching the footage, his jaw tightening with each passing minute. This wasn't just about his driver anymore, this was about right and wrong. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the video equipment. On screen, Officer Wilson was performing yet another trunk search. Trump's security team exchanged glances. They'd never seen their boss this quietly angry. They knew that look. It was the same one he got when someone crossed a line with his family or his closest staff. "Chief," Trump's voice cut through the silence as the call connected. "You need to see what's happening outside my club right now." His words were measured but firm. "My driver, 8 years, perfect record, drives foreign leaders, is being harassed by one of your officers." The security team watched as Trump's expression shifted from anger to determination. This wasn't the reaction many expected from him. This was personal. His driver wasn't just an employee. He was part of the Mar-a-Lago family. And now, watching the footage, Trump was seeing firsthand what his driver had probably experienced many times before. "I want this handled," Trump continued on the phone, his voice growing more intense. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Now." He gestured for his team to send the surveillance footage to the police chief's office. And Chief, this officer needs to go. This isn't what Palm Beach stands for. As Trump ended the call, his security team was already moving, gathering statements from witnesses, collecting footage from different angles. They knew this wasn't over, it was just beginning. None of them could have predicted that this incident would spark a chain of events that would challenge assumptions about politics, power, and justice in their community. Outside, still standing by his Mercedes under the Florida stars, the driver had no idea that things were about to change. He couldn't know that his employer was about to take a stand that would surprise both supporters and critics alike, or that his experience would become a catalyst for unexpected reform in Palm Beach County. The Palm Beach police chief was just getting ready to leave for the night when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Mar-a-Lago's number, and Trump's voice came through clear and determined. What followed was a conversation that would shake up the department and the community. "I've got video footage of your officer profiling my driver," Trump said, his words sharp and focused. "Check your email. I want you to see exactly what's happening outside my club right now." The police chief quickly pulled up the surveillance footage on his computer, his expression growing more concerned with each passing minute. The chief had dealt with complaints before, but this was different. The video evidence was clear, the witnesses numerous, and the complainant was a former president who rarely sided against law enforcement. He watched as Officer Wilson conducted yet another search of the Mercedes, the timeline showing this stop had gone on far too long. "This stops tonight," Trump continued, his voice firm but controlled. "I've known this driver for 8 years. He's driven world leaders, handled top-secret clearance, and now he's being treated like this in front of my own club." The chief could hear the genuine anger in Trump's voice, not his usual political bluster, but real, personal indignation. Within minutes, the chief was on the phone with his night supervisor, ordering an immediate end to the traffic stop. But Trump wasn't finished. "I want this officer suspended by morning," he insisted. "This isn't about politics. This is about doing what's right." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity at the police department. The chief called an emergency meeting with his command staff, reviewing the footage from multiple angles. Officer Wilson's partner was interviewed, admitting the stop had gone far beyond normal procedure. The department's internal affairs division was activated, pulling Wilson's previous complaint records. Meanwhile, at Mar-a-Lago, Trump was meeting with his driver in his private office, something that raised eyebrows among the staff. The driver sat across from his boss, still in his uniform, still maintaining his professional composure, despite the ordeal he just endured. "This wasn't your first time, was it?" Trump asked, his tone softer now. The driver hesitated before shaking his head. Years of similar incidents had taught him to stay quiet, to not make waves. But now his boss, a former president known for supporting law enforcement, was taking a stand on his behalf. By midnight, the story was already spreading through the Palm Beach police force. Officers on the night shift whispered about Wilson's suspension, about Trump's unexpected intervention, about the video footage that made it impossible to deny what had happened. The chief drafted the official suspension notice himself, knowing this case would be different. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous, and the complaint came from someone the department couldn't ignore. Officer Wilson would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. Dawn was breaking over Palm Beach when the chief finally left his office. Local news vans were already gathering outside the police department, tipped off about the late-night activity. Social media was buzzing with witness videos from the traffic stop, each one showing a different angle of the same troubling scene. In his Mar-a-Lago apartment, Trump was still awake, making calls, ensuring the suspension would stick. He'd surprised many with his swift action, but to him it was simple. His driver was family, and you protect family. What he didn't know was that his response would spark a larger conversation about power, privilege, and how change sometimes comes from unexpected places. The morning news shows were already running the story when Palm Beach woke up. Witness videos from the traffic stop played on every major network, each showing a different angle of the same troubling scene. The headlines were impossible to ignore. Trump takes stand against police officer, Mar-a-Lago driver incident sparks controversy, former president demands officer's suspension. Local news vans lined the street outside the Palm Beach Police Department, their satellite dishes reaching into the morning sky. Reporters clutched coffee cups, waiting for the chief's promised press conference. Inside, the department's public relations team scrambled to prepare statements, knowing this story was unlike anything they'd handled before. Social media exploded with reactions, creating unlikely alliances and surprising divisions. Trump's usual critics found themselves praising his swift response, while some of his strongest supporters struggled to reconcile his actions with their pro-police stance. The comment sections filled with heated debates about loyalty, justice, and the unexpected ways change can come. Breaking news, the CNN anchor announced, "We're going live to Palm Beach, where former President Trump has taken unprecedented action against a local police officer for racially profiling his longtime driver." The screen split to show the surveillance footage alongside live shots of Mar-a-Lago's gates, where a small crowd of supporters and protesters had already gathered. Inside Mar-a-Lago, Trump's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Political allies wanted to know his strategy, media outlets demanded interviews, and civil rights leaders expressed their surprise and support. But Trump's response remained consistent. "This isn't about politics. This is about standing up for good people who work for you." The driver's story began spreading through the community, resonating with many who had similar experiences, but never had someone powerful enough to demand change. Local residents who witnessed the traffic stop came forward, their testimonies adding weight to the surveillance footage. One elderly couple who lived nearby shared their video with news stations, showing the full 45-minute ordeal from their front porch. By midday, the police chief stood before a forest of microphones, cameras flashing as he confirmed Officer Wilson's suspension. "We take these allegations seriously," he stated, his voice firm. "The evidence is clear, and we are conducting a thorough investigation." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but one voice cut through the chaos. "Is this political pressure from Trump?" The chief's response was measured. "This is about right and wrong. The evidence speaks for itself." Behind him, protesters on both sides of the issue had gathered, their signs creating a visual representation of America's divided response to the incident. National civil rights leaders began arriving in Palm Beach, drawn by the unusual narrative of Trump taking a stand against police misconduct. Talk shows debated the implications, political analysts struggled to fit this into their usual frameworks, and social media couldn't decide whether to praise or criticize Trump's actions. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's driver continued his normal routine, picking up club members and running errands, now followed everywhere by curious onlookers and occasional news cameras. His professional demeanor never wavered, even as he became the unexpected symbol of a larger conversation about power, privilege, and justice. The sun set over Palm Beach that evening on a community grappling with unexpected change. The story had moved beyond a simple traffic stop, beyond even Trump's intervention. It had become a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about justice, influence, and the surprising ways that change sometimes arrives. Nobody could have predicted that a routine traffic stop would force both supporters and critics to question their assumptions about politics, policing, and the power of standing up for what's right. The Palm Beach Community Meeting Hall was packed to capacity, the air thick with tension and expectation. Local residents, police officers, and community leaders filled every seat, while others stood along the walls. At the front of the room, the police chief faced his community, ready to address the changes sparked by the Mar-a-Lago incident. "We've heard you," the chief began, his voice carrying through the packed room. "What happened last week wasn't just about one traffic stop or one officer. It was a wake-up call." The crowd listened intently as he outlined new training programs and accountability measures for the department. The police union representatives sat stiffly in the front row. They'd initially defended Officer Wilson, but as more evidence emerged from the internal investigation, their position became increasingly difficult to maintain. Past complaints surfaced, showing a pattern that could no longer be ignored. 3 similar complaints in the past year alone, a community board member announced, reading from the investigation report. The room buzzed with whispers. Officer Wilson's record, once sealed from public view, now painted a troubling picture of biased policing that had gone unchecked for too long. Trump's driver sat quietly in the back of the room, still in his uniform after finishing his shift. He hadn't planned to speak, but when community members began sharing their own stories of problematic traffic stops, he felt compelled to stand. The room fell silent as he walked to the microphone. "I've been a professional driver for 20 years, he began, his voice steady. What happened to me wasn't unique. What was unique was having someone powerful enough to demand change." His words resonated through the room, touching both critics and supporters of the police department. Local business owners spoke about their employees' experiences. A retired teacher shared stories from her former students. Each testimony added weight to the investigation's findings. Officer Wilson's termination, announced that evening, felt less like a victory and more like the first step in a longer journey. Outside the meeting hall, news crews interviewed attendees, capturing the community's mixed reactions. Some praised the department's swift action, while others worried about the precedent it set. But most agreed on one thing: Palm Beach was changing, and this incident had accelerated that change. The police chief announced new measures: mandatory bias training, community oversight committees, and regular reviews of traffic stop data. These weren't just superficial changes meant to quiet the controversy. They were real reforms sparked by an unlikely alliance between Trump and civil rights advocates. Later that evening, at a local diner, police officers and community members found themselves sharing tables, having difficult but necessary conversations. The waitress kept the coffee flowing as they discussed changes in protocol, shared experiences, and worked to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community they served. Back at the police department, Officer Wilson's locker was being cleared out. His termination letter cited multiple violations of department policy and public trust. His partner, who had watched uncomfortably during the traffic stop, now led training sessions on intervention and accountability. The sun set over Palm Beach, casting long shadows across the police department's parking lot. Inside, a new shift of officers attended the first session of enhanced cultural awareness training. Outside, community members gathered for a peaceful vigil, their candles flickering in the evening breeze, a symbol of hope for lasting change. Nobody could have predicted that one traffic stop would lead to such significant reforms, but as the community came together to address long-standing issues, it became clear that sometimes the most meaningful changes come from unexpected moments and unlikely allies. 6 months after the traffic stop that changed Palm Beach, the local police academy welcomed a unique pair of speakers. Trump and his driver stood side by side at the podium, addressing a room full of future officers. The unlikely duo had become powerful advocates for police reform, their story proving that change could come from unexpected places. "Look at the person next to you," Trump began, gesturing to his driver. 8 years of perfect service, drove world leaders, had security clearance, but none of that mattered during that traffic stop. The cadets listened intently, many taking notes. This wasn't the usual Trump speech they'd expected. It was personal, genuine, focused on real change. The driver shared his story next, his voice carrying years of experience and newfound purpose. "I'm not here to criticize police officers," he explained. "I'm here because we all need to do better." He described that night, the repeated searches, the growing crowd of witnesses, and finally, the moment when someone with power chose to stand up for what was right. In the months since the incident, Palm Beach had become an unexpected model for police reform. The new training programs, developed with input from both law enforcement and community leaders, were showing promising results. Traffic stop complaints had dropped significantly, and community trust was slowly rebuilding. "Change isn't about politics," Trump told the cadets, his driver nodding in agreement. "It's about doing what's right, even when it's not popular with your usual supporters." Some of his longtime political allies had criticized his stance, but Trump remained firm in his support for the reforms. The police academy's hallways now displayed posters promoting community policing and unbiased law enforcement. In one classroom, officers studied real-world examples of both good and bad police interactions, including footage from that fateful night outside Mar-a-Lago. The incident had become a teaching tool, showing how quickly a routine traffic stop could become a catalyst for change. Local businesses reported a shift in community relations. The same diner where tense conversations had once taken place now hosted regular meetings between officers and community members. The waitress who had kept coffee flowing during those early difficult discussions now knew most officers by name. Trump's driver continued his normal routine, but things were different now. Other drivers shared their stories with him, seeking advice and support. He'd become an unofficial ambassador, bridging gaps between law enforcement and the community. His professionalism during that traffic stop had set an example that others followed. At Mar-a-Lago, the security team had strengthened their relationship with local law enforcement. The club's gates, which had once witnessed discrimination, now symbolized cooperation and change. Trump regularly invited police officers and community leaders to discuss further improvements over dinner. The Palm Beach Police Department had transformed its approach to training and accountability. Body camera footage was reviewed regularly, not just after complaints. Officers who showed exceptional community engagement were recognized and rewarded. The department had become a case study in how traditional law enforcement could adapt to modern challenges. As the sun set over the police academy, Trump and his driver wrapped up their presentation. The cadets rose for a standing ovation, not for the former president's title, but for the example of leadership he and his driver had shown. Their unlikely partnership had proven that meaningful change often comes from standing up for what's right, regardless of political consequences. Outside, palm trees swayed in the evening breeze as new recruits approached the speakers with questions and comments. This wasn't just about one traffic stop anymore. It was about the power of unexpected allies, the importance of speaking up, and the possibility of real change when people chose to do what's right over what's expected.